We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Archaeoanimals, the podcast about the archaeology of animal bones and apparently video games. With you as always is myself, Simona Falanga, and my co-host
Alex Fitzpatrick.
And as you may have guessed, gone back on the video games, because that's what we do.
We're doing it.
Doing it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, no one asked. No one even suggested this is what they wanted. So we decided to do it anyway, because we figured we'd talk about it so much.
Actually, didn't you do a Twitter poll around it where Dragon Age won, and you insinuated that I'd hijacked the poll to make it win?
Yeah, and that's exactly what you did. So no one really asked for it. You made up several sock puppet accounts, and you just kept voting. It was a weird thing to do, I think, but, I'm not going to judge you.
Yeah, me, bad. Oh, yeah. Dragon Age creatures.
We love it. Dragon Age. We love it. Dragon Age creatures. We love it. End of the episode. Nailed it.
You don't know what Dragon Age is? Look it up. Or even better, play it. It's great. Do it. Do it.
Send us our checks, Bioware.
But yeah, so we just thought we'd continue on our sort of what's become a bit of a series now on the zooarchaeology imagined zooarchaeologies of video game creatures. Dragon Age, per se, we sort of mentioned a few creatures before. If you're interested, they'll be over on episode 13, along with some creatures from Fallout, Skyrim, and The Witcher, which also has its very own episode, which is episode number 26. So if you want to hear more of this, go check them out. If you don't, you know which ones to avoid.
Yeah, and you can remember it because this is episode 31, and if you swap the numbers, it's 13. Just so that. Whoa! Galaxy brain here.
That's what we got. That's what we got degrees for.
Yeah, just basically have a PhD now, and I was just doing this.
Just like that perception, yep.
Yeah, that's the level of perception that you could tell from my thesis, to be completely honest. I mean, if you listen to our previous episodes, it's going to work very similar. We're going to take a few species. We're going to do our favorite thing, which is divide them by wilds or tamed/domesticated, and then kind of go through what we think their skeletal morphology would look like. But before that, we should probably do a brief overview of the game just to get a sense of the environment we're talking about, that lore, that good lore.
I wouldn't even know where to begin.
I will put you on a strict timer, maybe. I mean, it's your basic. It's not basic, but at the core, it is your medieval fantasy genre type of video game. It's an RPG. It has, as of now, it's got 3 games in the franchise: Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition. There's a 4th game coming out soon. Well, soon. Soon in video game years. So, in the next, decade, maybe it'll come out.
Well, to be fair, I've already started my marathon to prepare for it, because there are the 3 games which are out. There is a number of novels, because you have The Stone Throne, The Calling, Asunda, Masked Empire, Last Fly. So 5 novels, and then just an amount of comics, which I'm not even going to list. There's loads. But because I've got great hobbies, I've actually made a list of all sort of the canon sort of game and material in chronological order. So I thought I might run up to the release of Dragon Age 4. I'm going to be reading the content and playing the games in chronological order all the way leading up to the start of the new game, because that's me.
I mean, I can't really make fun of you because I just replayed Origins and 2, and I tend to replay Inquisition every couple of months at this point, and I'll do a full 100 hours kind of playthrough because it's a good game.
I do that, and then I find myself making the exact same decisions because the way I see it,
never changes. No,
the way I see it, it's like a book that I've really enjoyed. So
exactly.
If you like a book, you read it over and over again. You won't change bits of the book; you'll read it as is.
Yeah.
But yes, just to sum up. So yeah, Dragon Age is sort of a medieval high fantasy RPG by Canadian developer Bioware. So of course, what it's known for is a very sort of painstaking world building in terms of landscapes and creatures, lore and history. I mean, like the game's companion books are like mini encyclopedias of everything from different names of the seasons and the months, all the way down to like depiction of skeletal morphology of some of the animals and the calendar and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So it's again very immersive game and very sort of consequence-based game where you get a series of options which will determine various different outcomes in the game. So it sort of gives that player that extra bit of agency. So it's good stuff. Sort of like, much like Mass Effect, which we covered a couple of episodes ago, and which I should have mentioned before. So yes, there's one about the creatures of Mass Effect. An episode that you should also check out by the same developer. And you can tell.
Yeah, but more importantly, there's loads of different creatures that you can murder. And in Inquisition, when you murder them, you can use their body to craft things, which is obviously a very interesting concept to kind of look at. Because, I mean, there's crafting in the other games we've discussed, but I feel like it's not... Dragon Age doesn't have the most robust crafting system in a video game. But I feel like the very specific nature of, you use the teeth of this animal to make this thing is kind of interesting and obviously has a lot of real world, correlations, which we'll obviously talk about. But yeah, I mean, and the great thing about this game and like a lot of the other games we've discussed is that there are a very diverse amount of environments. So we have a lot of kind of choice to talk about, like in terms of what we want to discuss for this episode. So I guess we might as well go into it because we kind of talked everyone's ears off about us being fangirls. So
nothing wrong with that.
Well.
I mean, a bit off topic, but most of the show is usually off topic anyway.
This is true. You said you wouldn't talk. Yeah, so turn off your mic. God. We don't get to do anything on this podcast. Yeah. Anyway, wild animals of Dragon Age. Obviously, there's a lot we could have just picked for this, but I think Simona was the choice master in this, and I think you picked a lot of really interesting creatures to talk about, and they're very diverse. I don't mean that sarcastically, even though that's the kind of energy I just put out, but...
It can mean that sarcastically by all means. I've tried to go for slightly more obscure ones. I'm sorry, my cat is trying to open the door. Come on, sweet. Up you go. There you go. I was trying to select sort of like more unheard of creatures, also because I think we covered the main ones in the Zooarchaeology of video games, or the more generic episode that we've done. So I thought we'd choose a few more obscure species from sort of a variety of different climates, just to what extent like the work has gone into sort of giving these creatures different characteristics based on the environment they live in.
Yeah, so let's start off with the bogfisher. So bogfishers are from Dragon Age Inquisition, I believe. They're specifically from Dragon Age Inquisition. And they favor dark, moist habitats like caves, swamps, or marshes. This is directly from the codex of them.
I believe you find them in the Fallowmire.
Yeah, I believe so as well. And the reason why I didn't even recognize this when I saw it on the list is because I've never actually killed one of them, because they are one of the rare docile creatures that don't actually attack you unless you attack first. And they looked cute, and I didn't want to hit them.
Oh, and they're so strong, because then like it's happened to me several times that while in combat, one of my party members has hit one by mistake. It's like, oh dear, oh no, just run. just run.
So they're, and if you look them up online, they've got somewhat monstrous reputation. They're not the best looking creatures, let's be real. They're very shy. They only hunt eels, frogs, and fish, according to the Codex. Basically, they kind of look like boars met hippos. And probably the other thing to know about these creatures is that they're known for their rough hide. So if you do accidentally kill one, or purposely kill one if you're a freak, you'll just end up with some rough hide, which is a pretty decent, I think it's like tier 2 crafting material in the game. So, make some armor with that if you want. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? I thought they were very boar-like, especially with the teeth and like the skull, not the skull, the face.
Yeah, because I don't know, the skull, I guess, sort of with the dip is fairly reminiscent of domesticated pigs, because usually, wild boars, it goes down a bit straighter, and that's the technical term. And in terms of dentition, it's a bit weird because it's sort of reminiscent of a boar, as in you will have the tusks, which of course hippos have as well, but much, much, much larger than that. But also the rest of the teeth are all very sharp and sort of are reminiscent of the dentition of fish. And I seem to be spotting that in a lot of Bioware creatures, both in Dragon Age and Mass Effect. There's a lot of creatures that have sort of a full mouth of teeth. They're sort of like all almost samey looking, sort of like these sharp pointed teeth. That kind of reminds me of fish, which I guess if you're a bog fisher that eats eels, that'd work.
Yeah, no. And I think this also touches upon a recurring theme in these, episodes, which is that a lot of times when we discuss the imagined Zooarchaeologies, a lot of it just shows kind of the aesthetic choices and what creature designers and video game designers think are really interesting looking. And again, even though that might not be, the kind of evolutionary track that would actually naturally happen, I think it's a nice thing to kind of discuss in terms of, what do humans think are the most threatening kind of adaptations, the most unseemly adaptations, from that kind of perspective, if that makes sense.
Because especially, I guess, in like enemy creatures, as like creatures that will attack you on sight, I guess there is a selection going on, what is the most unsettling for the most part. And of course, it's not the case of the bogfisher, which doesn't attack you per se. But I guess a lot of the creatures in Dragon Age and Mass Effect, with this sort of a full mouth of teeth, like of pointy teeth like that, it's very like, it's not necessarily scary, but it is unsettling. And fish skulls are unsettling.
Well, I mean, we don't have time to get into that, but listen to our fish episode if you want to hear my thoughts on that kind of topic.
Moving from the bogfisher to one that will definitely attack you.
Yeah.
Is the good old quillback, of which I've lost the photo. You'll find that most of the creatures that we're covering here are found mainly in Dragon Age Inquisition, because the reason for that being as well, of course, like some creatures will be seen across sort of the 3 titles, but Dragon Age Inquisition having a substantially larger map, I believe it's larger than Origins, because I guess there's a lot more exploration that you can do within the map as opposed to Origins, where it does tend to be a little bit more linear in terms of paths that you have to follow. Having such varied, like large maps and environments did also come, part and parcel with creatures that adapted to these climates. The quillback being one of these, which again is a boar-like creature.
I really like the quillback. Yeah, it's a really interesting creature type, and I feel like it's not really a creature type that you really see. There's a lot of creatures that we've talked about in this game and other games, and I mean, most of it down to, there's only a finite amount of imaginary creatures you can kind of create. The quillback, I think, is really interesting. So according to the Codex, it's a 4-legged beaked creature that's found roaming the desert landscape of the Western Approach in Western Orlais, which is basically France in Dragon Age. It has a burgundy kind of color, and it has these like feathers protruding from the spine and a hooked beak. But it's still, like Simona was saying, very kind of boar-like as well, so it's not necessarily a bird. And the hooked beak I thought was a really interesting touch as well, just because that kind of beak is mostly found on birds of prey for, chomping and killing and all the other fun stuff. And also, oddly enough, on parrots, which they use it to crack nuts.
Yeah, so that seems like a feature of several creatures the Western Approach, or just the general areas, like the Western Approach, the Anderfels, and also, I'm forgetting the other desert map, the Hissing Wastes.
Yes.
Do you seem to find a lot of beaked creatures? Because you have the quillback, you have the phoenix, which you've covered in the Zooarchaeology video games episode, I believe. And of course, sort of griffins are meant to be, I don't know whether they originate from this area, but of course they would live mainly in the Anderfels because that's where Weissort is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh, there just seems to be a thing for creatures sort of in the desert habitats having adapted to have beaks for reasons.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting kind of, and I don't know if that was necessarily done purposely or if that just kind of happened, but zooarchaeologically, I mean, that's a really interesting kind of tidbit, and I don't think I actually even picked up on that. So
yeah, but it's a very interesting structure because yes, the rest of the skull is sort of boar-like, but also not really. And then just the rest of the skeletal morphology is just so different because there seems to be. Well, again, I guess that's not new for Bioware because you see that thing, especially in Mass Effect creatures. There's an emphasis over the front limbs, over the back limbs.
Yeah.
The muscle seem to be particularly accentuated in the front of the body, which I guess won't necessarily reflect on the bones, but I guess should have much larger tendon attachments.
Yeah. Again, I mean, a lot of this doesn't make sense on a anatomical level, but I can see where they're going for on a, design kind of level. But it is interesting to kind of, think of these things in this kind of perspective. Anyway, I think we should probably take a short break and then we will get back to the wild animals and then move on to the domesticates, if that's okay with you.
I suppose.
Yeah,
Let's do it. Let's do it. See you after break.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ANIMALS. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
And we are back with Archaeo Animals. We are talking about the imagined zooarchaeology of the Dragon Age video game franchise. And last we left off, we were talking about the quillbacks, and I think we have one more animal to talk about in the kind of wild animals category.
Oh, I've recently added a bonus animal, which isn't really a wild animal or much of an animal at all. But I thought that was interesting because, well, it's not only an animal which isn't an animal, but which looks like an animal, but it's also a canon cryptid that then you actually see in game.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk about the snowflare first before we get to that one.
Oh, the humble snowflare or snoofleur, however.
Snoofler.
As you may expect, they're native of Orlais, which is not so loosely based on France, medieval France, given that everyone has French names and speaks French.
Literally speaks French in the game.
Oh, like, it's off topic, but one thing that I never noticed before is that if you actually go to Val Royeaux, the songs that the bards normally sing, so say at Haven or Skyhold, are actually sung in French.
Oh, you didn't notice that?
It took me a while to notice. It just went way over my head, and then I thought, like, oh, is there some new update to the game? And no, it's always done that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's my favorite thing I think about Dragon Age is that it has all this rich lore and everything, and then when it comes to the kind of cultural differences between the regions, at least when it comes to language, they're literally just, this is France. They all have French accents, and all of the like specific words for the most part are just French.
I guess it gets a little bit more of a mix in some places, because Antiva, again, like we'll wrap up this OT very quickly, but Antiva sort of is based on Venice, because it's very Italian, but then people have a Spanish accent, but Italian names, but sometimes Spanish names. And of course, Antiva, I only found this out recently, so if you've seen some of the earlier material, Antiva is referred to as Calabria, and that was going to be the name of the area. So if you read it in the book, in The Stolen Throne, they mention Calabria, and I'm like, where's Calabria? I mean, aside of the obvious southern Italian regions, like the one right at the tip, right before Sicily, is Calabria. Yeah, then I found out that, yes, that was the name for Antiva, but then it was changed, and it's Antiva now.
Huh. Good to know.
There you go.
Anyway,
Snuffler.
Snufflers. Yeah, they are tapir-like mammals native to Orlais. They have blue skin, small tusks, and long drooping noses. They are very cute. That's not on the codex. That's just me kind of, articulating my feelings about the snowflare. And I hate any time I accidentally kill one.
But they are very cute, and it's the name as well. It's like, oh, it's a Snuffler.
Snuffler. Sounds like a Pokemon.
I mean, it could be, for all intents and purposes. But yes, again, in terms of skeletal morphology, I mean, you'll probably be looking at it having a structure very similar to a tapir?
Tapir? I always thought it was tapir. Did I say tapir when I was reading the codex?
No.
Possibly. But yeah. Someone will angrily message me about how I pronounce it wrong. It's fine. But anyway, if you haven't seen a tapir's skull, please Google that right now, because this is probably the kind of skull that a snowflare would have, and it is horrible.
Well,
that's all I want to talk about.
Uninitiated. I mean, what would the nasal cavity look like in a tapir?
Oh boy. Oh boy. It's just a mess, honestly. If you look at the skull,
I'll do that.
I don't know where to begin. Boy. Mostly, I just want to talk about the weird,
I've just seen it. Okay.
Have you just pulled it up?
That is, it's a wild ride.
Oh, this is your first time looking at it. I'm so glad that we could capture this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether it's because the difference with the snowflare.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm not sure if it's because I'm looking at a juvenile, because this particular photo that I pulled up as the third molar just erupting, but they don't seem to have tusks, or they have canines, but they're much less developed. They're only tiny.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I just really wanted to talk about how weird these skulls are, generally speaking. What's with that, weird protrusion? I don't know. It looks like someone accidentally found and broke another skull and then just plopped the cranial vault on top of a different animal.
Yeah. But yeah, and I guess there's some really big muscle attachments as well for the trunk.
Yeah.
So that is the snowflare, everyone.
Yeah. If there's another reason why you shouldn't kill them, it's because you don't want to see the skull. No,
which you don't tend to in Dragon Age. But yes, so now we have a little bonus one. I thought, yep, so it looks like an animal, but it isn't an animal really. And as I've mentioned, it's also a cryptid, and it is the gibbering horror.
Great name.
It was first mentioned in 923 Dragon, sort of in a letter exchange between a mage circle, the Circle of Monsimar, which I believe is in Orlais. I might have that wrong.
Sounds French.
And someone in Kirkwall. So apparently, the gibbering horror started off as a joke, as in when circle mages would go into the Fade, they would encounter odd creatures and then just call them, I saw a gibbering horror. But that's when people then slowly started to actually see it. When they were in the Fade, out the corner of their eye, and then it became more and more prominent. So it is actually not entirely known whether the gibbering horror was indeed always there, and then people started seeing it, so they started acknowledging it, whether it was a creature that had long sort of been relegated to the deepest realms of the Fade, and sort of it being in people's minds, it started resurfacing or was revived, or whether it was actually they've been entirely created by people's subconscious. Because of course you can shape, as a mage, you can shape a lot of the Fade. Also, depending on your skill, you can mold things and make them reality. So what if the collective subconscious of all the circle mages crafted this creature, which is in fact not an animal, but a demon, or as it is mentioned in the Codex entry, it's a vermin demon. And its appearance, if any of you have seen a deep stalker, which is used this creature that inhabits the deep roads, it's very, there's no other way to put it, it's very sort of dinosaur-like. It's like a
raptor.
Like a featherless velociraptor, essentially. I guess about the same size as a velociraptor would have been. Oh no, we've just mentioned dinosaurs in an archaeology podcast.
Oh no, do you hear that? It's the archaeology cops. They're after us.
Yes,
Tristan, shut it down. We gotta shut this operation down now.
Terminating in 10, 9, 8, 7. Unfortunately, you will have to suffer longer. Thank you.
Is that an apology to us or to the listeners? Because
to the listeners, to the fish, and who else have we insulted in the past on this podcast?
Oh, we don't have time to get through.
Sorry. The list is somewhere. The list is somewhere. But yes,
my enemy's list is somewhere. Yes.
Can we? I mean, I do want to be clear. We are only comparing dinosaurs. We aren't actually talking about dinosaurs. So I think with the technicality, although I'll have to go and check it with the archaeologist code of conduct, I think we're okay in this case.
Tristan, I'm terribly sorry, but we've got actual content that we need to be discussing.
Apologies.
Wow. Dang.
So back to the scripted creature from a video game. So yes, the gibbering horror looks a lot like a deep stalker. So it's, again, very velociraptor-like, except it's got a mane. It's got a mane and just a little bit of fur going down its spine. And human hands for reason, or they look very skeletal human hands. But the head is actually a vestigial head, as in, like, there's no squishy bits left. Its head is just a skull. Precisely, a rabbit skull. I mean, rabbit-like is sort of very, the front side of it is very rodent/lagomorph looking. And a lot can be said for the molars and the rest of the dentition as well. The vault of the skull just looks bizarre because there's no eye sockets or anything, and it just looks like sort of a chunk of the cranial vault is just flat out missing, because why not? So it's haunting.
Yeah, sounds bad. Sounds bad, looks bad, don't like it. And let's move to the domesticates then, huh?
Yeah, but what if we domesticated the gibbering horror?
No. Bad. Don't like it. Vetoed. Done. No.
Yes, so in the Dragon Age universe, because we also have a variety of domesticated/tamed animals, because some are explicitly mentioned as wild, but then they do get used, say, as mounts in Dragon Age Inquisition. So, of course, they'd have to be sort of tamed, at least to a certain extent, for you to be able to just ride around, the Western approach. So
yeah, no, I really like this list of domesticates because obviously there are other domesticates we could have talked about, just beyond your average horse to, cows, rams. These all exist within the universe. Mabari, which I don't remember if we talked about in the original video game episode.
Probably not, because in a way, I found they're so similar to
dogs.
They're so similar to existing creatures, because the Mabari is just like a dog that's never skipped leg day or arm day or just never skipped anything at the gym. It's like super ripped. But
they're magical, actually. They were bred by Tevinter mages, and that's why they're so ripped and so smart.
Yeah, they were as well, yeah. Even though now they're mostly associated with Ferelden, and I'd guess many in Ferelden wouldn't know that they're actually of Tevinter origin. But then again, Fereldens don't exist, so there's that.
That's true. But yeah, no, I really think this is interesting because the three kind of examples we have are all mounts. And in Dragon Age Inquisition, as far as game mechanics, obviously you have your basic horse at the beginning, and you can trade those out with different exotic species and other types of species as you collect them throughout the game, doing quests and whatnot. So it's more of a, kind of cosmetic thing. But from a zooarchaeological and cultural standpoint, it's very interesting to see, just how many wild species ended up being tamed to be mounts, because it really varies. I mean, this isn't on the list, but technically the mount list for Inquisition includes a undead horse that has a sword stuck through its head.
Oh, the bog unicorn! That's fantastic.
I love the bog unicorn. That's like one of the best mounts. You have a mechanical, like an automaton type of horse as well. So there's a lot going on with these mounts, but we picked three, and by we I mean Simona. So let's talk about the battle nug.
Like what?
I love nugs. Very cute.
Also, nothing like a nug.
It's a nugalope. That's what it says in the codex.
Yes.
Avar harnessed and trained for war somehow is literally what it says in game when it talks about this.
I'm not sure if it'll spark fear in your enemy, but it'll sure confuse them.
I encourage all listeners, if you're not familiar with Dragon Age, to go and Google a battle nug, but probably put Dragon Age in the Google search as well, so that you get what we're talking about, because I'm sure there's other things. And it's basically like a big pig, kind of, that's got horns. And that's what a battle nug is, but it's like really big.
But also a bit, because I guess the skin looks very hippo-like.
Yes.
But then it might just be, because I guess a bigger version of the nug will have much tougher skin. Because a nug looks like, I don't know, like a mole rat and a pig had a child, and it's a nug.
They always remind me of piglets, to be honest.
Yeah, but it just got that naked mole rat vibe. I guess because they're an underground species, because they were originally just found in the deep roads, weren't they? It's like one of the main food items of the dwarves.
Yeah, and that's the reason why they're nearly blind, because they already kind of live in the dark. So I assume they must use some form of echolocation type of maneuvers to move around. They're very strange looking. It's kind of been a running joke within the series. So, of course, it culminates in creating the battle nug. And I think just kind of imagining how that creature was bred, because as it says in the codex there, Avar harnessed, and the Avar are kind of these tribes of people who live in the mountains, usually.
Yes, they're usually sort of in the Frostback Mountain, because they're basically sort of what's left of the original Ferelden tribes. Because while many of them sort of converted to Andrastianism and sort of so the culture evolved from there, some tribes decided to separate, to be like, no, we want nothing to do with you. We're just going to keep practicing our culture and traditions and live up here in the mountains. So the Avar being one of them, and I guess the Chasind being another, so down in the Kakari Wilds. But in a way, it's interesting about sort of the evolution of the species, because then if you think about sort of the nug is found in the deep roads underground, and to the dwarves it's a main sort of food item and also a racing animal. They race nugs for fun, and that's what they do.
As you do.
But then as the nugs sort of came out, and so I guess now they're sort of naturalized in many parts of Thedas, you will just see them wild around. But then as the Orlesians got hold of them, the nugs have actually become a companion animal there. So they're frequently kept as pets in Orlais, while Avar tribes, or Avarian, Avar tribes have instead sort of practiced selective breeding to turn it into an animal that was suitable for warfare.
And of course, there's also the fact that when we're talking about this specific kind of universe, there's also magic. So who knows how they ultimately were bred. But as you said, there's probably some really strange selective breeding going on here. I mean, like, where do the horns come from?
Well, I guess, well, you'd say nugalope, so you think antelope, but those are very clearly ram horns.
Well, I think it's also a play on, like, a jackalope as well. So.
I mean, it might well be.
Which, you know, rabbit with, like, horn things, antlers,
oh, yeah,
whatever
I think about the nug, because actually in one of the World of Thedas companion books, there are actually illustrations of the skeletal morphology of the nug, and the skull, wasn't it sort of very horse-like, but with rabbit teeth?
Yeah, they were. They really love just kind of messing around with those teeth, huh?
But it's good, it works. It's just, yeah, cow nug.
Oh, true.
Nugalope, everyone. Now, I guess like the next one is a slightly more similar to its real-world counterpart, and that's the hart, which is essentially a giant deer. And I believe hart is indeed the word used for red deer that's sort of over 5 years old.
Yeah, in medieval England, more or less. I believe that's where it's like localized. So yeah, it's just a big red deer. And the main interesting tidbit is that the back half has these kind of stripes that look like an okapi, which is an African animal that looks like it should be related to a zebra, but it's actually related to giraffes. It's very strange. And it's got elk-like antlers, which are, but more like alces, not Severus. So, like moose.
I thought I'd specify that because, of course, in Britain, when you say elk, you mean alcis. So a moose. Well, I guess in North America, an elk is a red deer, and it's just yeah.
And it also seems like we both have the same favorite breed.
Well, as people whose canon always involves a female elf, somewhat to be expected. Because yeah, that's the heart. So you think it's a wild animal, but of course it's tamed enough for you to be like for the animal to be happy for you to just ride it places. But at the same time, there are different breeds. So there's some selective breeding must have been going on, unless there's sort of some beginning of speciation. So like based on where the geographical area of the animal. So they've developed slightly different adaptation that makes them look slightly different.
I mean, I believe that. I think. Especially when you look at the kind of like, if you use deer as the kind of comparative species, we have different types of deer here in England. They're not necessarily like completely different, but there's slight differences in the way they look and their morphology. So I see
even
that
like it's even less pronounced here, because of course, like with different species of deer in England, you have your red deer, fallow deer, and roe primarily, plus a bunch of other ones. These over the last 100 years or so, but they are different enough so that they are indeed like different species. But with the heart in Dragon Age, I mean, it's really just the coat color. So, like, I think from a skeletal morphology point of view, they all very much look the same. So I wonder, like, maybe not quite speciation, but just, different breeds developed by man, or just simply a fact that they develop different coat colors based on their environment.
Or magic.
Yeah. And also, of course, like, we hinted at it but didn't mention, both our favourite breed, clearly, is the Pride of Arlathan.
Woohoo! Anyway, after all that, we should probably take a break, and then we will get to our final species and our case studies. Well, not really case studies, more of it's just discussion.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
Yeah, and we're back with part 3 of our episode on the imagined zooarchaeology of the creatures of Dragon Age. We still got one domesticated / tame creature to cover, and then we'll get right to what we somehow think is your favourite part of the show, which is the case studies. It might be that it's actually the one you hate the most, but we'll go with that being your favourite one. We'll go with that.
Anyway, so yeah, this one's probably next to the Battle Nug, the more interesting one. Especially, again, like the Quillback, I feel like there's not necessarily a type of creature that you see in other, like, fantasy things, if that makes sense.
No, I guess, I mean, really, in short, it's like a dragon that you can ride.
A dragon horse.
Like a dragon horse thing. I mean, it does say in the codex that it's been selectively bred, but specifically magically bred. So I guess Tevinter's at hand here.
Mm.
So that probably explains a lot of, like, what, how, just magic. That's like the Dragon Age version of ritual.
Yes.
Magic.
But there's rituals in Dragon Age as well, so magic.
Also, we mentioned ritual sound effect here. Archaeo Animals Bingo. We're there for it.
So the Dragolisk, you read from the Codex, to ensure the Dragolisk was suitable for battle, they have been magically and selectively bred, resulting in an animal that is stronger and larger than its ancestors. It has been rumored that they may share blood with dragons or wyverns. I can never pronounce this word.
Wyverns?
Yeah, that one.
I see that. Now I'm intrigued. An animal stronger and larger than its ancestors. Now, a Dracolisk, it's definitely smaller than a dragon,
Yes.
and like smaller than a wyvern too.
Yep.
So what was its ancestor? If you're listening to this and you work for Bioware, please tell us, what's the ancestor of the Dracolisk?
Also, send us an early copy of Dragon Age 4. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, I'm intrigued now, because even the smaller dragons, so the drakes, they are bigger than Dracolisk.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's very strange unless the implication is that it shares blood with these two creatures in that they're, adjacent species from the same kind of family. But the Dracolisk was its own species as well.
I mean, unless, what is it? Is that because we don't know when they were created, but say if they're created in ancient times, and by that I mean the literal sort of Theodosian ancient time period, they might have got sort of a primitive species of horse, and as we know, primitive horses were quite small. Yes, hear me out. So they got a primitive horse, and they've, with magic and selective breeding, they have mixed it with both dragons and wyverns. So it's got larger, of course, much similar to what a horse size is today as the species has developed over time. And, of course, it's taken on some morphological characteristic of both the dragons and the wyverns. There, I've explained it.
Yeah, this one's kind of falls into that category of creature that we talked about a bit in the Mass Effect episode of when in doubt, just make a mammalian creature look more reptilian, Well,
I mean, definitely a trend for Mass Effect. So I guess, yeah, it has that alien vibe, because in a way it is alien in the sense of the word that is unknown to you. It's just like, oh, what is this? You know what I mean? So like the literal meaning more than an extraterrestrial.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is it is basically a dragon in its look. I mean, you look at the face, the skull as well. It's very dragon-like. I mean, obviously it says it in its name, but the way it holds itself is very like horse-like, which is just so bizarre to look at.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like dragons are already, you know, most of the time quadrupedal animals, but yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, because of course the length of the limbs is much more akin to one of a horse, which it makes sense in this instance. While with dragons, they tend to, well, at least as they're depicted in Dragon Age, and I'm pretty sure just like canon, just dragons in general, they do tend to squat and almost have like their belly on the floor almost as they move about. So they've got sort of like that lizard element to them, which the Dracolisk doesn't have. And I find they're a lot slimmer as well, and while sort of the rough hide is reminiscent of dragons, it's not quite as rough and plate-like as dragons tend to be depicted. Of course, if you don't count the bony growth on the head, which they have about 4, I believe, and like some more small ones sort of like going down a bit like a horse's mane, but it's actually just a series of small spikes going down. And also it seems to be like they don't seem to have much of a nose, I've noticed, because what you see, like, it's literally, so the nasal cavities or the nasal bones seem to be protruding and they're just covered by a thin layer of skin.
Yeah.
So
It's very weird looking, especially for something that, in all intents and purposes, could have just been a dragon. So it's a very interesting approach to a dragon-like creature.
As I said, like, much like the heart, it is quite varied, because you do seem to find sort of different, well, I'm guessing breeds, because this is, by the looks of it, like an entirely sort of man-made animal.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I guess, the different breeds were developed to suit different climates. So you have breeds like the mountain Dracolisk, which is more used as you'd expect in mountainous climates. The abyssal houndtooth, that's instead native to the western approach. So they seem to have developed different skin sort of colorations depending on which area they're suited for, or just purely so that you could have a lot of mounts in different colors. But no, nothing to do with that. No. It's adaptations to the environment.
It's adaptation, not game design.
No. It's magic.
It's always magic. Yeah, it's just magic. It's fine.
Well, to be fair, because it's magic, magic implies a ritual.
God. Yeah, we really just had to get that word in, didn't we?
Some more, just like shoehorn it, just a little bit more.
We haven't talked about the Romans, so...
Case studies aren't over yet.
That's true.
Huh.
Yeah.
Case studies!
So, yeah, the case studies for this episode are, like I said, a bit more of just kind of discussion points. Because, you know, the main things I think we like to talk about when we do these episodes is, obviously, we do the morphology creature by creature. But the main kind of, like, overall theme that we want to hit upon is, you know, what are the parallels with real world animals? Because obviously, even though in canon these are all kind of natural or magically bred creatures, in the real world they are just creations of a bunch of game devs. So obviously it's really interesting to discuss kind of where do they get these kind of inspirations, where are these comparative species with the real world. And then, of course, you know, what does the morphology ultimately tell us? That's kind of like the main, I guess, educational message that we want listeners to get from these episodes is, you know, what is Zooarchaeology brain, basically, how we look at these creatures and how do we interpret based on what their skeletal morphology looks like and, you know, the kind of things that relate to that. So I guess we should first talk about, you know, what's the crossover with real world animals. And with Dragon Age, there's actually a lot of just real world animals thrown into the game. They might look slightly different, but they basically picked a couple of species that were very important to the medieval period. So you have your wolves, your dogs, like we were discussing before. There are Mobari that are a specific breed of dog that were created magically. But, you know, dogs do exist, bears, rams, horses. They all exist within the Dragon Age universe as well.
They exist, yeah, they all exist in Britain, much like squirrels, which also exist in Britain.
There are no squirrels in Dragon Age.
No.
See, I nailed one at least.
Suggestion for Dragon Age 4, giant blighted squirrel.
Oh god. Now, see, here's the thing though. Now, if Dragon Age 4 comes out, if the apocalypse doesn't happen and Dragon Age 4 does come out, if there is a squirrel like Easter egg in it, we know that at least one person listens to our podcast who works at Bioware, and that's all I want.
I'd be most honored. But I guess these are all sort of creatures that we've not really covered in the previous episodes where we've mentioned creatures in Dragon Age, because they do look quite a bit similar. Of course, like Mabari, as we've mentioned before, they tend to be sort of a very ripped dog because magic. Although I guess there are some parallel, I guess maybe with bull breeds.
Yeah, I guess so.
Although to be fair, you had some, well, not quite similar to Mabari, but I'm pretty sure there was a bull breed type in Britain that the Romans documented, which were actually quite high prized.
She got us there, folks. She did it.
So yes, and of course, your bears and your rams, which are the Druffalo. Let's not forget the humble Druffalo.
Of course, yes. I actually completely forgot about the Druffalo, which is, it's a buffalo.
It's essentially a buffalo. I think the horns are a bit different.
Yeah,
but it's mostly that, and the rams are quite similar. Of course, maybe not the August ram, which are blue. Don't think we have any of them.
Give me a bit of blue dye, and I'll probably show you some August rams.
Don't use blue dye on a ram, please. Ideally. But I guess another thing that's very interesting that you mentioned in the introduction, and I guess that links back to zooarchaeology, is in Dragon Age you do have a certain emphasis, and I guess not just Dragon Age, in a lot of sort of high fantasy RPGs, you do tend to have an emphasis on the use of animal parts for crafting purposes.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because, a lot of times in video games, generally speaking, animals and creatures are either there to be kind of, scenery filler, they just look aesthetically pleasing, they're in the background of shots, stuff like that, or they're actively enemies, or just, neutral parties that you can shoot if you're weird. And then as crafting became more of a very important part, we tend to see the use of, you can kill this animal and get this thing pop up. I think even before that, obviously, in a lot of games, you could kill animals to get health, either as food or just, hearts or whatever. So it's interesting to see, because I feel like video games in general are kind of taking this turn, the crafting turn, where more games are incorporating crafting in their gameplay. So it's really interesting, especially in Dragon Age, because I feel like using animals as part of crafting is a very grounded way to approach it. It's very lore friendly and feels very real. And obviously with zooarchaeology, we are very interested in this kind of use of animals, because obviously if you're using the teeth, the quills, hide, you're going to see them zooarchaeologically. And we've kind of talked about this in previous episodes, but imagine all the marked bone, all that butchered bone that's lying somewhere in Ferelden.
But I think what is also interesting, in Dragon Age in particular, I find that there seems to be a very sort of cause and effect way. So it's not just, to make this particular armor, you're just going to mix a bunch of random things that supposedly don't really go together. And then, and then you get this armor. You do actually get certain benefits from using a part as opposed to another. So then if you use the hide, so a particularly thick hide from an animal from a cold area, it'll give you cold resistance.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So it's more intuitive as to what the various parts actually do. And it's even in terms of color. So then if you use quillback hide, your armor will have a slightly red tint as a quillback.
Yeah, and I also would love to thank whoever was the game dev from Bioware who decided to implement that, because it is, one, my favorite part of the game, and two, something that I spent hours and hours doing to make all of my characters look nice. Thank you so much.
Oh, like same. It's something I think I didn't get into until my second playthrough, because normally I was the kind of person I didn't have much patience for stats and crafting and armors, and I was like, oh well, I just want to do my storyline and then just fight things. But I think as I got more into the lore, that because I think Bioware in particular is brilliant at creating this immersive worlds.
Yeah.
And also, there was some logic behind the crafting. I was like, oh, I'm having a lot of fun with this. So it's just something that even I, that usually didn't used to do that, got quite into the whole crafting process.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly immersive. And again, as zooarchaeologists and general nerds, it's really interesting to kind of have that, like you were saying, that cause and effect of, okay, well, if I use nug hide for my armor, it's only going to be, this much defense. But if I actually go and kill a dragon and use the dragon hide, I will have so much better armor. So it's also nice to kind of have that context of, obviously a dragon will have thicker and more harder armor or hide to use as armor, rather than something you get from either a nug or a ram, one of the various deer species that are out there. So it's really interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, there's also some random stuff out there, like something will give you 15 spirit resistance, but you've got to make a game at the end of
it's magic.
It's fine. It's magic.
It's magic. Anyway, and kind of moving to the morphology of the Dragon Age animals. And I think, again, one thing I really like about Dragon Age, and it's something we talked about and you see in games like Mass Effect and Star Wars, they have really widely varying environments. And you can see that in the anatomy and the morphology of kind of the Dragon Age animals. And as a zooarchaeologist, it's really nice to kind of see that variation. So you have, in Thedas, which is the region that this game takes place in, you have those kind of snowy mountains of the hinterlands versus the really deep temperate forests of the Arbor Wilds and the Emerald Graves, or the deserts of the Hissing Wastes in the Western Approach. So I really like that variation. And again, you see that variation a lot in dragons, which we actually didn't really talk about at all, because, dragons.
Well, I think we may have covered in the episode where we grouped several games together. I think we may have covered dragons then, because I remember discussing the drakes and the high dragons, and I guess the great dragons, which we've technically not encountered in game.
No, yeah.
I think you potentially see them briefly, or definitely hinted at in one of the comics, and that's it.
Okay.
So, great dragons, it's a thing that are dormant somewhere and can only be awoken by the blood of Kaelin had. So that's a thing. That's there. That maybe they'll make use of, or maybe they won't.
But yeah, obviously these animals will have varying differences based on their environments and how they adapt to these. And I really like that variation because, it's so common in a lot of fantasy, especially, that you end up, everything's in what's basically Britain. So you don't have that kind of variation. And I think we also kind of covered the differences in environmental morphology when we were talking about quillbacks who live in, the desert versus, say, a bogfisher, which lives in a more wet, humid environment like the fallow mire. And the other thing about morphology that I found really interesting is, the mounts. And again, we kind of touched upon this already, but we have all these different species that have been systematically bred into very similar shapes and sizes to accommodate riders. And it's very interesting. And I feel like in a lot of ways, the morphology issue in Dragon Age kind of shows morphology at its extremes, Yeah.
I think it just goes to show how much work has gone into it, where we could get a whole episode and a bit out of it. And just the morphology of all these made-up creatures. But it's fascinating. Yeah. Just the thought process alone is fascinating.
Yeah, that's why Bioware should hook us up. Well, we'll do an episode with them. Casey Hudson, you just left Bioware. You don't have anything else to do. I think with that, we will end this episode. That's a deep pull, I think, if you're not into gaming news. But yeah, let's end the episode with that. You can find us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at ArchaeoAnimals. We are also on Twitter at ArchaeoAnimals. Let us know what you want to see next or hear next, I guess, from our podcast. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about us. Anything else?
I think you've pretty much covered it all. All I know, just go play Dragon Age.
Yeah, go play Dragon Age.
It's fun.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to ArchaeoAnimals. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. You can find us on Twitter at ArchaeoAnimals. Also, the views expressed on the podcast are those of ourselves, the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily represent those of our institution, employers, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV Traveling America, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.